They told me to step out of the frame, said I was throwing off the symmetry of their perfect little family photo. I laughed, but not out loud. I smiled for a picture I wasn't in, then quietly stepped aside, like I always did. Until one day, the same sister-in-law who cut me from her Instagram grid opened Forbes and saw my face staring back, not as a tag-along, not as a wife, but as the founder of a company that just ate hers alive. And no, I didn't take their picture down. I rewrote the whole frame. When I first moved into their house, I thought I was stepping into a dream. The Klein estate wasn't just a home. It was a cathedral to old money. Marble staircases, oil portraits of dead men with familiar cheekbones, and a dining room that echoed with every word spoken and every silence kept. I traded my downtown Boston apartment and my career as an AI systems engineer for this life, for love, or at least what I thought it was. They welcomed me with smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes, especially Victoria. Victoria, my sister-in-law, ran the house like a Fortune 500 company. Every guest list, every seating arrangement, every wine pairing, she curated them like a museum. To her, everything had to fit the image, including people, especially people. She always introduced me to guests as Andrew's wife, never by name, and when we posed for photos, she'd subtly guide me to the edge, like I was crowding the composition. One night during dinner, I realized I was seated closest to the pantry door, the farthest seat from the chandelier, the family crest, and the conversation. Someone joked that I was like a ghost at the table, present but not really there. They laughed. I laughed too. Later, I'd lie awake wondering if they even remembered I was in the room, but the picture was clearest the day of the family portrait. It was for their annual Klein Legacy calendar, a photo series mailed out to hundreds of business partners and social elites. Victoria had hired a professional photographer from New York, and every family member was scheduled like talent for a film. When it came time to take the main shot, parents, siblings, spouses, I stepped into place beside Andrew, my husband, like I was supposed to. Victoria smiled tightly. "Let's have you stand just a bit more to the left, Haley. A bit more. There. Perfect symmetry." Except symmetry meant my shoulder was the only thing still in frame. I could feel it, the unspoken intention. But no one said anything. Not even Andrew. He adjusted his cufflinks and smiled for the camera like nothing was off. And that, more than anything, told me where I stood. Not just physically, but in this family's hierarchy. Later that night, I overheard them. I hadn't meant to. I had gone downstairs to grab a glass of water and paused when I heard Andrew's voice through the study door, low and careless. "She's temporary. You know that. It's about timing. She's easy. Doesn't cause waves." Victoria chuckled. "A ghost wife. Looks nice on paper, doesn't take up space in reality. Honestly, I thought you'd married better, but hey, pretty, quiet, and malleable is still useful." I didn't breathe. I stood there, invisible, just as they'd always treated me. And maybe, for the first time, I saw it clearly. They hadn't accepted me, not truly. They'd absorbed me like a decorative rug, expensive enough to show off, but always underfoot. But what they didn't know was this. Before I married Andrew, I had filed a patent on a dynamic learning AI protocol. It was shelved, forgotten, until last month, when I got a notice from a European tech firm. They had run simulations on my system. It had outperformed theirs. They wanted to license it, and they were willing to pay. I hadn't responded yet. I wasn't sure why. Maybe part of me still clung to the illusion that this family, this marriage, was worth preserving. But standing there in silk pajamas that weren't mine, in a house filled with art I'd never choose, listening to voices I once trusted, I realized I was the outsider trying to fit into someone else's frame. Maybe it was time to redraw the picture. I didn't start with revenge in mind, that's the truth. I started with survival, emotional survival mostly, because once you realize you're not loved, Not really loved, but tolerated. You either shrink to fit or stretch to break the frame. I chose neither. I chose to slip out of it entirely. It began with an old email thread. Buried deep in my inbox, flagged red, unread for 3 years. Still waiting on you to build something again, it said. It was from L. Park, my former boss at Skylab Robotics, now a partner at a boutique VC fund focused on femtech. She'd seen my name on the patent filed before I left the industry. She was still tracking it, still tracking me. We met at a quiet cafe under the excuse of catching up. I wore a beige cardigan and flats. No makeup, no scent, no noise. I played the part well. She, however, came in sharp, tailored blazer, confidence like heat. You always knew more than you let on, she said after the initial pleasantries. Still pretending to be the polite little housewife? I'm not pretending, I replied. I'm learning. She didn't laugh. She leaned in. There's a project I want you on. It's called VeriSense. We're creating AI-driven biosensors for women's health, silent diagnostics, predictive patterns. Your protocol is exactly what they need. I didn't hesitate. Not this time. Within a week, I had reviewed the models, met with the startup's founders, and invested under a pseudonym, H.K. Klein. Not Haley, not Mrs. Andrew Klein, just initials, just power, stripped of gender, stripped of placement. It felt clean. The money came from a fund I'd opened before I got married. My mother had always told me to keep something with only your name on it. Back then, I thought it was outdated advice. Now, it was oxygen. VeriSense welcomed my input like fresh air. They didn't care about my last name, only my insights. They looped me into board calls, sent prototypes to my inbox. I spent nights in the guest room pretending to browse home decor when I was really rewriting algorithms, flagging biases, correcting code in real time. By day, I smiled politely at brunches and nodded along to conversations about yacht refurbishments. No one suspected a thing, least of all, Victoria. Victoria was too busy managing optics. After the IRS did a light audit of one of the family trusts, she was scrambling to reallocate funds. One night, I noticed she'd left her iPad on the kitchen island. I wasn't snooping until I was. She had 3 shell companies under one umbrella account. One of them was funneling money to Dubai in small, structured transfers, below reporting thresholds. Tax evasion, money laundering, or maybe just hiding assets from her husband. Whatever it was illegal. And reckless. I took photos with my own phone. A few clicks, clean and quick. From that moment, everything changed. I began mapping the family empire quietly, surgically. Their real estate holdings, their offshore assets, their board positions. I traced which companies were struggling, which were vulnerable. Then I started buying in. Small shares at first through holding accounts I controlled. I wasn't interested in ownership. I was interested in positioning. VeriSense's valuation tripled after a successful pilot with a European health firm. My shares quadrupled in worth. Ella sent me a message. You're the most anonymous power player I know. I replied, let's keep it that way. Except it wouldn't stay that way for long. One morning, as I was reviewing updates from the VeriSense board, a new email pinged my screen. It was from Forbes. The subject line, Feature Confirmation, Women in Power Edition. I opened it slowly. Congratulations, H.K. Klein. You've been selected for our cover story next month, featuring emerging women leaders in silent tech. We'd love to set up a photo session and interview at your convenience. I stared at it. Not with fear, not with excitement, with finality. Like a door I'd left cracked open had just swung wide, and now I had to decide if I would walk through it. I closed the laptop and stepped into the sunlight streaming through the kitchen window. Victoria was across the room, pouring coffee, talking loudly into her phone about some gala detail she needed to approve. She didn't look at me. She never really did. But I looked at her now. Not with envy, not with rage, with knowledge. She thought I was still the girl at the edge of the photo. She had no idea the frame was already changing. Power, when it's quiet, moves like water, seeps into cracks, collects in unseen places, erodes stone before anyone notices the shift. I'd always known that. It was how I learned to exist in the Klein house without disturbing the symmetry. But now, the silence was no longer a defense. It was a strategy. I didn't mean for Victoria to find the folder on my laptop, not directly, but I also didn't close it when I stepped away to refill my tea. It was labeled innocuously, Financial Trends, Klein Assets. Nothing incriminating, but just enough to spark curiosity. I knew her type. Control wasn't just her habit, it was her religion. She saw it, she pretended she didn't. The next day, she offered me coffee with an overly sweet smile and casually asked, "Do you still keep up with the markets, Haley? I've heard biotech's the new gold rush." I nodded. Some trends never go out of style. I could feel her watching me more closely after that, hovering near doorways, asking more pointed questions at dinner, looping me into conversations I used to be excluded from. She suspected something, but not the truth. Not that she was already playing a game I had built. And she was 3 moves behind. The family had a quarterly meeting that weekend, ostensibly about restructuring the board of their philanthropic trust, which Victoria chaired. It was always a farce. The men nodded, the women smiled, and Victoria talked over everyone. This time, though, she had a proposal. "I think," she said, pushing her binder forward, "we should consider rotating the executive board of the Klein Trust for transparency and perhaps bringing in someone with more public recognition." Her eyes flicked toward me. "I'd like to propose that we move Haley into an advisory role, less day-to-day involvement, more ceremonial." I didn't flinch. I folded my hands and said, "Whatever's best for the trust." Andrew didn't say anything. No one did. They thought I was agreeing. They always misunderstood silence for consent. Later that evening, I submitted a formal anonymous complaint to the IRS tip line. I included transaction logs, wire transfer records, shell company details, all tied back to Victoria's misuse of charitable funds. I didn't embellish. I didn't accuse. I simply attached facts. Truth, when deployed at the right time, is more brutal than any rumor. 2 weeks later, the first audit notice landed on the doorstep. Victoria screamed. Not out of guilt, she never believed she'd be caught, but out of insult, as if the system should have known better than to question her. Andrew, meanwhile, had grown increasingly distracted. Calls late at night. Long silences at breakfast. One morning, I noticed he'd left his tablet unlocked on the kitchen counter. It wasn't his habit, but then again, none of this was. I glanced at the screen and saw my name, not in a message, on a draft post. It was a screenshot of the Forbes cover, not yet published. The photo was striking, my face half-shadowed, captioned, "The Silent Architect, H.K. Klein, and the Rise of Covert Power." Beneath it, Andrew had written, "Meet my wife, Haley Klein. While I built a family, she built a lie. Pretending to be the doting partner, all while hiding millions, manipulating markets, and positioning herself to take us down from the inside. Who really is H.K. Klein? Let's find out." He hadn't posted it yet, but the draft was ready, tags and all. I stood there, hands steady, breath slow. So this was it, his move. The man who once called me his anchor now branding me a saboteur. I opened a new window on the tablet and logged into my anonymous cloud archive, the one with receipts, chat transcripts, contracts, time-stamped project files. I copied the link and pasted it into a new email addressed to myself. Subject line, "In case he posts." Then I made myself breakfast. By evening, the post was live. The internet ignited. Half the comments praised me. Iconic. Smart is sexy. The wife they didn't see coming. The other half tore into me. Snake. Gold digger with a LinkedIn. How many masks can one woman wear? Andrew went on a podcast the next day claiming betrayal, manipulation, emotional abuse. He cried, badly, unconvincingly, but publicly. Victoria stayed silent. She was still fighting the IRS and couldn't afford to be seen taking sides. The family retreated, and I, for the first time, stood at the center of the fire without feeling the heat. Not because I was immune, but because I had already moved beyond the burn. I didn't call for drama. I didn't stand on a stage. I didn't even step out of my house. But I spoke, for the first time, publicly and in my own name. The live stream went up on a Tuesday morning. Simple frame, neutral backdrop. No stylists, no handlers, just me, a mic, and the version of myself they never saw fit to acknowledge. Not Haley the wife, not H.K. Klein the investor, just me. I told them everything, not with malice, just clarity. How I'd been advised to step aside for family photos, how my ideas had been smiled at, then recycled under someone else's name. How I'd been kept just visible enough to be decorative, just quiet enough to stay invisible. And how, through it all, I'd kept building companies, alliances, technologies, and most of all, resolve. Then I showed them the numbers, the projects VeriSense funded, the research grants for femtech innovation, the anonymous donations to women's shelters in 3 states, receipts, signatures, timelines, no flair, just fact. The live stream ended with a single line. When they erased me from the picture, I didn't disappear. I just learned how to draw my own frame. Within hours, the video exploded. Social media split open. Articles headlined, "Ghost Wife or Genius?" The woman behind the curtain finally speaks. One tweet went viral. They wanted her to be the silent wife. Turns out she was the architect the whole time. Victoria went underground. She released a statement about respecting family privacy and coincidental financial discrepancies, but the board wasn't buying it. That week, she was officially suspended from all leadership roles across the family's philanthropic foundations. The very empire she once ran like a queen was fracturing at its foundation, quietly, just like the way I'd begun. The Klein Company stocks dipped for the first time in 4 years. Board members scrambled to distance themselves from the chaos. Private emails surfaced. Internal probes were launched. And through it all, I said nothing. Until the message came. It was from Andrew. Not a call, just a short email, formal and sharp. "The paperwork's finalized. You'll find a signed copy of the divorce in your inbox. I assume you won't contest the terms." I didn't. I downloaded the file. I stared at the signature for a full minute, not out of grief, but out of the stunning neatness of it all. No parting conversation, no fight, no goodbye. Just his name, slashed in black ink. By that evening, the press was already chasing a new angle. What would Haley do next? Would she lead a company? Launch a product? Run for office? But I had nothing left to prove, so I disappeared. No interviews, no guest columns, no conference panels. I turned down every request with the same line. The work speaks for itself. Instead, I started something quieter. The Haley Klein Fund. No media coverage, no photo ops. Just capital and belief given to women who'd been pushed out of rooms, passed over for promotions, cut off mid-sentence. Engineers, designers, researchers. I didn't just give them money, I gave them presents. Once a month, we met in a rented loft with mismatched chairs and too much coffee. We shared what we were building, what we were breaking, and what we'd been told we could never do. And then we did it anyway. Weeks passed, then months. And then, on a rainy Thursday morning, an email slipped into my inbox. Forbes 50th anniversary cover issue, confirmed. I opened it, read the first line twice. You're not just a feature, you're the face, the cover. The theme is the women who rewrote the rules. We can't imagine the issue without you. I didn't smile, I just exhaled, slow, steady. Not because I needed the recognition, but because the last piece of their puzzle had finally turned into mine. Power in silence had once been my refuge, my strategy, my weapon. But as the applause faded and the headlines dulled, the silence became something else entirely. A weight pressing against the walls I'd built, echoing louder than any voice in the room. I had everything I thought I wanted: autonomy, legacy, recognition. Yet I found myself staring out windows more often than screens, wondering if I'd simply swapped one kind of prison for another. The Haley Klein Fund was growing rapidly. The applications poured in. Smart, hungry, underfunded women with ideas that threatened to reshape entire sectors. I read every proposal personally. I reviewed each pitch with a rigor I once saved for code. And still, I missed her. Jules Tran, 25, a robotics engineer from Seattle. Her proposal was brilliant: low-cost mobility devices designed for children with cerebral palsy. Her math was airtight, her design revolutionary, but the board had flagged her pitch as over-ambitious. They said she lacked leadership presence, experience, polish. They said no. I hadn't caught the rejection until it was too late. I'd been traveling, distracted. By the time I saw her name on the internal memo, her email to us had already gone unanswered for weeks. And by the time I replied, too late, too late. Her sister had already posted a photo of Jules' apartment, still and unfinished, captioned with grief. They told her she didn't belong, so she believed them. I read it at 2 a.m. alone, in a penthouse room with blackout curtains and soundproof walls. It was the first time in years I sobbed so hard my shoulders shook, because the gate that had once shut me out was now mine to hold. And somehow I'd closed it too. All my life I'd wanted to prove them wrong, the family, the industry, the system. But in doing so, had I recreated the very mechanisms that had once crushed me? Was I now the quiet judge behind the door, nodding when the room said no? I started pulling files, looking back through our decisions. How many others had we rejected for reasons dressed up as logic? How many times had I said no in the name of structure or polish or fit? And what did that make me? I thought of Jules again, her face in her pitch video, her excitement, her steadiness, her hesitation when she said, "I've never pitched before, but I've built this since I was 16. She deserved better. I remembered the day I was pushed out of the family photo. The moment felt less like a wound now and more like a warning. Back then, I'd thought the pain came from being unwanted. But it wasn't that. Not really. It was that I had seen the whole room clearly and realized it didn't want to change. It wanted to stay symmetrical. And I'd chosen to become the frame. Days later, I found the photo again, the one Victoria had commissioned, the one where I was shoved to the edge, half-cropped, smiling too wide. I hadn't looked at it in years, but now I zoomed in, not on her, on me, and there it was, my eyes, not afraid, not desperate, focused in a way that unsettled me, as if I hadn't been ignored, but observing, not small, but studying. I hadn't been trying to fit into the picture. I'd been measuring it, measuring what it would take to redraw it. That realization cracked something open in me. Maybe I wasn't here to take the pen from those who once held it. Maybe I was meant to question the paper it was written on, the desk, the ink, and more importantly, ask who else was never invited into the room where it was written. That night, I called an emergency meeting with the fund board. I laid everything out, my failure, our failure. I didn't hide behind policy or language. I told them about Jules, about what we missed, about what we refused to see. Then I gave them a choice. Either we become the place that rewrites access, I said, or we become exactly what we once fought. No one spoke for a long moment. Then Elle, seated across from me, closed her laptop and nodded. Then let's change the damn rules. We revised the selection process. We replaced traditional pitches with blind evaluations. We prioritized ideas, not polish. Need, not networks. But still, the question echoed in my head. Am I building new doors or repainting old gates? The day I walked away, it wasn't dramatic. There was no press release, no staged farewell, no cryptic social media post. I simply logged into my accounts, signed a final series of transfer documents, and began unwinding myself from the legacy I'd built. I sold every share, stepped down from every board, closed every door I'd once pried open with blood and precision. I didn't do it in bitterness. I did it in clarity. Because somewhere along the way, I'd realized that legacy isn't what you build for others to admire. It's what you leave behind so others don't have to ask permission to begin. That was how the Blank Frame project began. No investors, no brands, no curated logos or names attached. Just a small studio in an unrenovated part of town, where the walls weren't lined with power but with paper. We put out an open call. Come write what was erased. Come show what was missed. You don't need our approval. You need your truth. And women came, in waves. Not just entrepreneurs and engineers, but nannies, migrant workers, formerly incarcerated mothers, girls who'd been told their stories were too small or too loud or too inconvenient for the world to hear. We didn't offer capital. We offered canvas, space, witnessing. No one had to pitch. No one had to perform. They just had to speak. And what they said changed me more than any boardroom I'd ever sat in. One wrote, "I wasn't fired. I was disappeared." Another, "I wasn't too emotional. I just stopped translating my pain for your comfort." A third, only 16, left a drawing instead. A girl standing outside a locked door, holding a key, smiling. I stopped taking interviews, declined every feature. I was asked, begged even, to comment on policy, industry, gender dynamics, Forbes lists. I said no, again and again, not out of defiance, out of alignment, because I didn't want to be framed anymore. I wanted to make space for others to frame themselves. Years passed, quietly. And then, one fall afternoon, I received a letter. An actual envelope hand-delivered, no stamp. It was from a gallery in New York. The curator had attended a blank frame session months ago. She had cried, then left without a word. And now, she'd created something. A new exhibit, photos we were erased from. Inside the envelope was an invitation to the opening. No pressure, just an offer. The space was filled with images reimagined, family portraits redrawn to include daughters left out, school pictures edited to restore dark-skinned girls, airbrushed by editors, office headshots altered to highlight women hidden behind credit lines they didn't own. And among them was mine. I didn't know it until I walked in, hours before the gallery opened to the public. I'd come unannounced, wearing a coat too big and shoes too plain. I didn't want anyone to recognize me, but I recognized the frame immediately. It was the photo from my wedding, Victoria's curated, symmetrical masterpiece. The one where I had been cropped so far to the side, my face was barely visible. Except now, it was different. I wasn't on the edge. I wasn't in the center either. I was behind the camera. The image had been digitally reconstructed, not to spotlight me, but to reposition the power. In the new version, the family still smiled, still posed in perfect symmetry, but the angle was different, because I was the one holding the lens. My name wasn't on the plaque beneath it, just a quote. I wasn't erased. I was observing, measuring, and waiting to draw it better. I stood there for a long time, not in pride, not in pain, in peace, because this was the moment I'd been chasing all along. Not the revenge, not the victory, not even the justice. Just the moment when I no longer needed to be in the picture at all, because I knew who I was, what I'd seen, and what I had helped others finally see for themselves. A girl about 18 wandered up beside me, holding a sketchbook. She looked at the photo, then back at me. "Did you take this?" she asked. I smiled. "In a way." She hesitated, then opened her sketchbook, a rough drawing. A girl standing between two doors, one pristine and locked, the other open but cracked and messy. "I don't know which one to walk through," she said. "Neither," I told her. "Draw your own." She blinked, then nodded. She walked away, and I stayed a while longer, not to be seen, but just to remember that once they tried to erase me. And now I had given that erasure a name, a frame, and 1,000 new doors,